Last time we discussed the underlying logic of social development during Mao's era. Today, let's talk about the interest chain of the Belt and Road Initiative. Over the years, headlines in major official Chinese media often mention China for giving loans to African countries, building railways, airports, and power stations in Africa, West Asia, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, and generally spreading money around. If there was no profit in these actions, would the CCP still engage in them? Today, we will try to analyze the interest chain of the Belt and Road Initiative to see how it operates and whether there is indeed a profit to be made. Before we proceed, it's necessary to first explain the basic concepts and the broader historical context. The Belt and Road refers to the transnational economic belt running from Qinghai and Xinjiang to Central Asia and even Western Asia. The road is the so-called maritime Silk Road that starts by sea and passes through Southeast Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, India, Africa, and Latin American coastal countries. In other words, the Belt and Road Initiative is China's way of exporting its surplus capacity to poor countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America through US dollar loans while enhancing its political influence internationally and improving the capital operation capabilities of major state-owned enterprises. It is essentially economic colonialism, as those familiar with 19th century economic history would know. This was the model used by Western countries such as Britain, France, and Germany when investing in China. However, my analysis of the Belt and Road's interest chain is not to pass value judgments but to discuss what the Belt and Road is really doing and how it profits. Let's also touch upon the era of the Belt and Road. Xi Jinping came to power in 2013. At that time, after a stimulus of 4 trillion yuan, China's economic growth slowed down again, and the major state-owned enterprises' surplus capacity could not be converted into profits. Then, the Belt and Road strategy was proposed to encourage state-owned enterprises to go out. Even before the Belt and Road was proposed, major state-owned enterprises were already conquering territories in various Asian, African, and Latin American countries. They bought mines, helped others extract oil, and built railways, but these were direct investments. After the start of the Belt and Road, it mainly involved spending money and effort to help with infrastructure, using the strategic resources of the host countries as collateral. The focus was still on strategic resources, just with an added layer of trickery. After all, these countries needed to develop modern infrastructure like railways, highways, airports, and power grids, but they didn't have the money to do so. What to do then? Then China, a financial heavyweight with surplus capacity, appeared. The Belt and Road needs 4 basic tools: dollars, labor, construction materials, and technology. Let's start with the dollar. Over the years, China's massive foreign exchange reserves were not accumulated bit by bit through low to mid-range manufacturing of clothes, shoes, and toys alone. Just relying on manufacturing, China could never have accumulated 3 trillion in foreign exchange reserves. In the era of globalization, economic development is driven by 3 main forces: consumption, trade, and investment. The first 2 are also good ways to earn dollars, such as the Bible, of which over 75% are printed in China for the huge American market. The US consumes your timber and paper, your printing and typesetting services, and you earn dollars. The second way is trade, such as the many large hotels, major hotels, and chain restaurants in the US that use fridges, cabinets, sinks, cutters, mixers, etc., most of which do not use Chinese-made products, but places like Shandong, Fujian, Sichuan, etc., provide these foreign manufacturers with sheet metal, chassis, mining frames, rubber pads, trays, packaging boxes, etc. This is the trade on the indirect supply chain that also earns dollars. As early as when China and the US established diplomatic relations, China used the first 2 methods to earn dollars. How effective was it? In 1978, China's foreign exchange reserves were $167 million. Deng Xiaoping huffed and puffed and after 3 years managed a comeback. In 1981, the foreign exchange reserves were still $167 million. Deng Xiaoping struggled for 3 more years, and by 1981 the reserves had gone into the negative, reaching negative $1.287 billion. After another 3 years, the reserves were only $8.22 billion. China's first foreign reserves boom occurred in 1990, breaking through 10 billion for the first time, and doubling continuously in the following years. This breakthrough and subsequent growth were due to the establishment of special economic zones and the opening up of coastal cities. More importantly, some industries were opened up for investment, attracting a lot of dollar investments. At that time, the foreign exchange reserves were rising at a rate of 20 to 30 billion a year, which means that when economic drivers shifted from consumption and trade to investment, the reserves began to jump, completely exceeding the previous levels. More and more foreign capital came to China to invest and set up joint ventures, bringing in a lot of dollars. Before this, China was also seeking to join the World Trade Organization but wasn't so eager until it discovered the secret of rapid growth in foreign reserves. After that, the CCP became eager to join the WTO. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, becoming its 143rd member country, and promised to significantly open up investment fields and continue to give foreign capital supranational treatment. After that, a large amount of foreign capital poured into China for investment and factory construction. At that time, attracting investment was an important criterion for assessing local officials. In the year China joined the WTO, its foreign exchange reserves reached $212.165 billion, and subsequently grew by 19% to 50% each year, once reaching a high of $3.97 trillion until the growth rate began to slow after Xi Jinping took office. This amount of dollars involves a few issues. First, most of this money is from foreign enterprises' currency exchange and enters the Chinese market for investment in yuan, but when they leave, they take it away, including the profits. If you just keep it on the books, according to the economic growth rate and inflation rate at the time, it is continuously devalued. This involves issues of asset bundle liquidity and value preservation. Holding such a large asset bundle, you can't just make wedding dresses for others. Just like the deposits you keep in the bank has to find every possible way to lend it to other individuals or businesses in need to make a profit. The CCP also tried some investment methods, but as long as you invest in industry, you are bound to lose. Investing in high-tech and cultivating new technologies takes too long and the return rate is not guaranteed, and they are not good at playing the stock market. They don't believe in their own methods, and they are afraid of losing even the bottom store if they venture into venture capital. In the end, they had no choice but to buy the world's most value-preserving and safest US bonds. After buying for a few years, the CCP realized that although purchasing US bonds in excess was safe, the liquidity was insufficient and the returns were very limited. The money made a round trip back to the United States. The US wouldn't be polite to you, from the stock market to high-tech, from pharmaceutical transportation to the service industry, from industry to energy, they have plenty of hot money to export. The CCP found that no matter how many dollars they made, they were ultimately subject to others. So, they thought of a way to combine these dollars with what they were good at to make money. Over the years, what China has been best at is infrastructure construction. Building bridges, paving roads, and constructing buildings have always been the forte of state-owned enterprises, from the era of Mao to Deng and now to Xi. At the beginning, we talked about the four basic elements of the Belt and Road: dollars, labor, materials, and technology. We all know that China's labor costs are very low and easy to allocate, and the law is entirely in service of the state-owned enterprises, with state-owned enterprises interpreting it with no problems. So, cheap labor is available in whatever quantity is needed. Next is construction materials. After so many years of a booming real estate market, from construction steel, aluminum, cement, to excavators, mixers, bulldozers, to bricks, tiles, and pipe materials, the capacity is severely surplus, and the domestic market can't absorb it. Also, China's infrastructure construction technology is quite experienced, except for occasionally killing people, collapsing buildings, the appearance is still very shiny and imposing. If it's a project under key quality supervision, the quality is quite acceptable. After all, there's no technical threshold, as long as it's taken seriously, it can be done well. When the basic elements such as dollars, labor, materials, and technology are all in place, they start thinking about how to make trouble outside, and then the grand strategy of the Belt and Road comes along. They build airports for others, with an annual throughput of several thousand people, then they open mountains, pave roads, build tunnels, and set up power networks and communication components. These projects originally have no small returns. First, it gets the foreign reserves that were shrinking on the books moving. Second, the foreign aid infrastructure projects use the host country's key strategic resources as collateral, such as mineral resources or transportation service rights. For example, the Djibouti railway built for Ethiopia in 2016 was mortgaged with 6 years of operating rights for the railway. Third, it wins a lot of bids and projects for its own state-owned enterprises, revitalizes the enterprises and cash flow, and gains technology and experience. For example, the railway connecting Mombasa and Nairobi was contracted by the China Communications Construction Group, one of the 5 major construction maniacs, under its China Road and Bridge Engineering Company. Fourth, they can experiment with some of their own newly developed equipment, new methods, and new ideas without worrying about environmental protection and human rights issues. Fifth, it found an outlet for the domestic surplus capacity. For example, the steel and excavators piled up in the warehouses of state-owned enterprises now have a sales channel. Sixth, everything is based on loans from the host country. Since China itself provides the loans and does the construction, the host country is audited in dollars, but China calculates in yuan, which indirectly boosts the demand for the yuan. For example, building a railway in Zambia requires $1 billion. The private road fund under the Export-Import Bank of China allocates funds to the various state-owned enterprises involved in the project. The Zambian government's account shows $1 billion loan to China, but China uses its own construction companies, its own building materials, its own technology, and its own labor, most of which can be calculated in yuan, with only a small amount needing to be paid in dollars. After the railway is delivered, Zambia pays $1 billion to China. If the Zambian government is unable to pay, it can mortgage the operating rights of the railway or a certain mine to the Chinese government, which will send people to manage or mine it, using the proceeds to repay the debt. Seventh, some countries use food, gold, oil, or project shares and ownership as collateral, so China can easily obtain a large batch of hedging goods or options. For example, China Petrochemical helped Kuwait build a refinery and provided heavy refining equipment, which allowed it to obtain some of Kuwait's oil options. Another example is in 2010 when China built the Hambantota maritime port for Sri Lanka. The construction cost was $3.61 million, 85% of the construction funds were paid by the Export-Import Bank of China, and the price was the port being leased to China for 99 years, during which it was operated by China Merchants Group. Does this routine sound familiar? It seems like I've seen it somewhere before. Eighth, China's foreign exchange reserves gained a more efficient hedging mechanism. Previously, over 60% of China's foreign reserves existed in the form of bonds of various countries, 20% in large state-owned asset management companies, and another 20% in international financial institutions and investment banks. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy overnight, wiping out over $40 billion of China's foreign exchange reserves. The Belt and Road can effectively hedge against this market risk. Finally, everyone in this game can gain substantial benefits. China funds, foreign countries initiate projects, Chinese companies bid and execute. So, how is the tender written, and what's the process for the project? Isn't it all fixed? For example, laying a power grid in Sudan costs $500,000, I just write $10 million on the tender, then give the Sudanese government 2,000 guns, 5 cannons, and a suite in Beijing for the Sudanese officials, adding up to $1.5 million. The remaining $8 million is just for ourselves. The contract states that if the principal and interest cannot be repaid after 10 years, it will undergo restructuring, integration, or shell replacement with some state-owned enterprise assets of Sudan. 10 years later, the new president comes to inspect, and sees just 2 rows of power poles. There's no power grid at all. The president is dumbfounded. You can't pay back $10 million, so you might as well exchange it. When you look at the companies operated by the Chinese side, aside from a bunch of junk, there's nothing else. Seeing this, you might think that it's really fun to spread money around on infrastructure, and the CCP is really powerful, huh? It has to be said, the CCP system has indeed absorbed a group of top talents. They are much smarter than us, but don't think too highly of them. At the theoretical level, they are all very impressive, but at the practical execution level, they are fools, often wanting political leadership. Everyone wants a share of the benefits, and they like to take shortcuts. Of course, taking shortcuts is also to get more benefits, and things often go wrong here. It's not that bridges collapse, or buildings collapse. How is it done domestically? It's the same when moved abroad. To what extent is China crazy about foreign infrastructure construction? When repairing the power grid for Ethiopia, they went to a relatively open city, and the telecommunications infrastructure specifications in this city are basically like the 8-nation alliance. All kinds of specifications are available. From the 70s to the early 21st century, from government-introduced private inventions, everything was used. If it were an ordinary enterprise, seeing no profit and having to lose a lot of money, they would never take it. But the CCP? Not only did they take on the project, they also airlifted a whole city's worth of parts from China without changing the contract or increasing the costs for the other party, first removed all the previous messy equipment parts, then reinstalled them. Not only in Ethiopia, but similar things also happened in small countries like Sudan and Sierra Leone. China was laying a power grid for these countries, and halfway through, just as the deadline was approaching, they suddenly found that a machine set or part didn't match. The local government was terrified, afraid of delaying the ribbon cutting and delivery. Then the local chief engineer of the Chinese project made a phone call, and a special plane specifically brought this part over that day. The local government was stunned, and local news even reported on the efficiency of Chinese enterprises. Regarding the strange and wonderful stories of the Belt and Road, we won't say much here. Today, we mainly talked about the strange and wonderful stories of the Belt and Road, we won't say much here. Today, we mainly talked about the interest chain of the Belt and Road. If you look at the Belt and Road from the perspective of an observer, the concept is actually very clever. It uses China's huge but insufficiently liquid foreign exchange reserves, channels them through its own investment banks, and efficiently utilizes the surplus human resources and production capacity of state-owned enterprises, effectively playing to its resource allocation advantages and being clear about its capabilities and strengths, and choosing projects well. Whether from a macroeconomic level or from a foreign development perspective, it is very feasible. But if you look at it from an interest perspective from the beginning, it's best to consider it economically from start to finish, drive it with economic rules, and measure it by economic benefits. If you get halfway through and bring political issues and geopolitical issues into it, or even let the personal preferences of leaders influence the entire project, it will be troublesome. People can't have it all, and time again, history has proven this point. If you want to rule over all nations coming to court, like Zheng his voyages to the west, then it's best not to mention interest and collateral. If you want interest and collateral, don't expect others to come and decorate your facade. You want it all, and in the end, it's often a mess. In most people's understanding, foreign reserves are earned bit by foreign trade companies through hard work, buying US bonds and supporting Africa, which is rather shamelessly spreading money around. And supporting Africa is just shamelessly spreading money around. This is a cognitive error. You only know why the dollar has to be spread around if you know how it came to be. You only understand why assets need to be sent to undeveloped countries to mortgage their minerals or operating rights if you know about inflation and liquidity risks. You can only analyze why it goes to Africa to do infrastructure instead of investing in high-tech in Europe and America if you know that labor and material capacity are severely surplus. Because they don't need any of your technology, and they don't lack money. So, China can only go to Asian, African, and Latin American countries to help them build infrastructure. After reading all this, do you still think spreading money around is just for making simple friends? That's the interest chain of the Belt and Road, breaking through the fog of ideology, understanding history with a broader perspective, understanding our current lives.